Sometimes you have questions. Sometimes you need help finding the answers. Sometimes you need the inspector.
Let's talk a bit about the inspector. Now the inspector is turned on here in the top right-hand corner of the screen just by clicking on the inspector button. We've looked at this a little bit. We used the inspector window when we were modifying our text screens. It's a very powerful tool and it has a lot of practical applications, not just for text, but for special effects and even for simple audio and video. In this lesson, we will focus on the video tab. The next video we'll take a look at the audio tab. So when I turn it on, depending on what I have selected, this is what it should look like. And if I select a clip, I can see that I've got a series of things here: composite, transform, cropping, dynamic zoom, stabilization, retime and scaling, and lens correction. And I have to scroll through to see these. It changes radically. Let me zoom out here. If I were to click on a title, right, suddenly I have my title information. This is for this credit roll at the end. But you'll notice there's still a video tab here. So even that title has got these same video attributes that I can manipulate. All right, I'm going to go back to my clip of Scott in the kitchen and zoom in a little bit. So let's go through and take a look at what these different things do. Now I'm going to skip this first section, this composite with composite mode and opacity. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But right now I just want to look at the effects on this clip that's all by itself on video 1. Just Scott standing there in the kitchen. Now this transform section can be very useful. Zooming changes the size of the image. And you can see that the X and the Y zoom are currently linked. I can turn that off. But let's just see, if I click in this zoom window and drag to the left, I'm zooming out, which is actually making the video smaller. And you can see the black bounding box here. That's the size of my actual video frame. And this is the video within it. Likewise, if I go the other way and zoom in, I can artificially create a close-up. There are limitations to this, but pretty cool that I can do that, right? And on all of these, there's a reset icon to the far right-hand side. So I'm going to reset my zoom there. Just for giggles, let's take a look at what happens if I do them separately. So I can zoom the X out and stretch or shrink it that way. Let me reset that. And likewise, if I have the link broken, I can zoom the Y so I can get a stretching or a compressing effect here. So I'll reset those. The X and Y position moves the entire image around on the screen. X is your horizontal movement, Y is your vertical movement. 0, 0 is if you drew a plus sign, a big X on the screen, right? Your point of intersection right in the center is 0, 0. So as I click and drag my X to the left, you can see I'm physically sliding the image off the screen to the left. And as I click and drag my Y value, likewise, you can see I can move the entire image up and down. Now, if I combine this with the zoom, I start looking at something that might become practical in a minute. All right, let me undo those. Rotation is simply a way to rotate. Right, and I can spin this thing completely around if I wanted to. Anchor point talks about if this were a photograph and I stuck a thumbtack through it to spin it around, where did I put the thumbtack? So right now my thumbtack is in the middle of my picture. It's at X0, Y0. So again, it's right in the middle. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can better see this. As I rotate it, it spins around the center of the picture. I can get a graphic representation of this if I come to the bottom left-hand corner of the program window here. And there is a drop-down window. We looked at this very briefly. There are actually several different things I can look at. I'm going to leave it set to the transform view and then click once to turn it on. So we can now see this bounding box with manipulations on it. So if I were to click and drag that corner, I can rescale it, and you'll see that the X and Y zoom are changing themselves accordingly. If I grab this little icon, I can rotate it. And if you look over the inspector window, you can see the rotation angle is changing. This dot here, this is my anchor point. So when I rotate the picture, it rotates around that point. There's my thumbtack that I stuck right in the middle of the picture. So I can change the anchor point. I can do it by clicking and dragging these X and Y values here. Or I can actually click and drag the anchor point itself. So if I move the anchor point to the top corner there, now when I rotate it, it spins around that point. All right, so I'm going to reset my zoom. And you can see that now when I do the rotation, this is almost a way to do a transition, right? I could rotate it in and out of field depending on where I put that anchor point. I'm going to reset the rotation there. And I can turn this screen on and off, that graphic manipulation on and off, just by clicking that icon in the bottom left corner of the program window. Pitch and yaw are forms of distortion in 3 dimensions. So pitch is like if an airplane pitches pointing the nose up or pointing the nose down, right? So if I were to apply this pitch effect to a credit roll, I kind of get the Star Wars effect. Yeah. And yaw does it from side to side. So this sort of makes it look like a 3-dimensional object, like I'm looking at a screen from a corner. The flip horizontal and flip vertical do what you think they do. Flip horizontal changes left to right and vice versa. Flip vertical changes top to bottom and vice versa. So if you've shot something on your cell phone or on your GoPro and you ended up with it upside down because those things work in strange ways sometimes, fixing an upside down video is really quite easy. Likewise, if you're working with a screen recording of yourself and the image is mirrored, you can unmirror it by using the flip. And these all work in combination. I can use them in any combination I want to by zooming in, applying yaw, whatever. You can turn this entire section on and off with the on and off switch there, and this is true of every section we're going to look at. So as I scroll down, the next section I come to is cropping. Now each of these sections, if you double click on the section heading, will open or close so you can maximize your screen space here. Let's take a look at cropping real quickly. So I'm just going to open that up. And there's 4 controls, left, right, top, and bottom. And as I click these and drag them, what you'll see it's doing is it's actually cutting off part of the video. So by cropping my left and my right, now I can emulate what it would look like if I had shot this on a cell phone. And in this particular case, I'm going to open my transformation and I'm going to move it a little bit to the left to center it in the screen. There we go. It looks like I have shot it with a cell phone. Let me reset that. I can also, let me reset these. If I crop the top and the bottom, I can make it look a little more cinematic, as if it was shot on a wider aspect ratio. Right, so this might give it more of a feel of a Hollywood movie. I forgot to reset my position, didn't I? Oops, that's the one. Cropping comes in handy in several different scenarios, which we'll explore later. Softness makes the edges, this is also feathering is a way to look at it. Rather than being a hard cut, it softens the edge. It makes it to sort of fade out as it gets there. This will come in handy when we're playing around with doing green screen somewhere down the road. So I'm just going to reset all of these real quickly. Close my cropping. Dynamic zoom I don't want to talk about. There's a better way to accomplish that effect, but this would be creating a zoom that you hadn't already shot. If I wanted to zoom into Scott's face just using this shot as possible, but there's a much better way to do it, so I'm not going to talk about this one. Stabilization, if you have handheld footage and it's a little bit too shaky, this section will allow you to stabilize it a little bit. I don't need it for this shot, but were I to do it, you would see, I'll go ahead and click the stabilize button. Watch the screen as I do this. Okay, so right now it's going to go through an analysis process to see how it needs to proceed. And then you notice, boom, it just zoomed in a little bit. It has to zoom in because what it will do is it will move the whole screen around using that X and Y transform property to try and keep the same spot centered. There are variations to this you can play with. I'm going to undo that and turn my stabilization off. So even in the video scavenger hunt, one of the most common comments that I made is find a way to stabilize your camera. This will help. It's not a substitute for having a tripod, but if you even had it on the tripod, but the tripod was shaky because the wind was blowing or because you were shooting in an earthquake or because the tripod is sitting on top of a trampoline, whatever, stabilization can help with that. Then these last two, retime and scaling and lens correction, I'm going to save this for a later video. These get into some complex areas that we don't need to talk about yet. Scroll back up here to my transform and make sure everything is reset. And I'll turn my cropping off there because there we go. So now we're back to normal. There's not a lot of use necessarily for this on the basic layer, although, like I said, you can use some of it. If I scroll down here, let's take a look at my credit roll at the very end of the package. All right, and I'm going to turn off the video so we're looking just at the camera, or just at the credit roll. I might want to take advantage of this pitch effect. Oops. Remember to select the clip that you're playing with. Where the playhead is doesn't matter. Selecting the clip is all important. So I selected I select my credit roll. I go over here to the inspector. I go to the video tab, and then I trim that pitch. And there we go. I've kind of got the Star Wars thing going on. There's some problems with it stopping at the top, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, let's go back to our clip here, though. Now, I've got a piece of B-roll here that has Scott steaming the milk. So let's just take a quick look at that.
Foam on the top of the coffee. First, we want to start by heating up all the...
Okay, perfectly fine piece of B-roll. But I can make this a little more exciting, actually, by working with some of these tools. So I'm going to start just with the transform tool. And again, first I'm going to make sure that I single click on this clip to select it. I've got the red outline around it so I know it's selected. Because this is a piece of B-roll, right? It's up here on video 2. There's something hiding on it on video 1. Any changes I make might peek through. So for example, if I were to zoom this down, make it smaller, and then I'm going to change my X and Y position, I have created a picture-in-picture. Let me play that.
Foam on the top of the coffee. First, we want to start by heating up all...
Look at how easy that was. And I can actually stack this if I wanted to. I'm going to make a little more space here. And I'm going to grab a random piece of B-roll here. This is unrelated, but we'll just pretend that it's what we wanted to do. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my inspector window. You notice that my inspector window closed when I double-clicked and opened that other clip so that the preview window could pop back up. Again, this is because I'm working on a relatively low-resolution screen. If you have a bigger screen, that won't happen. I'm going to open the inspector. I'm going to single-click on my new piece of B-roll to make sure it's selected. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to zoom out on that, and I'm going to change my X and Y values. So now I've got two picture-in-pictures going.
The coffee.
So I could do this to simulate a Zoom class, for example. If I had footage of 9 people all talking, shot at different times in different locations, by using this combination of zoom and position, I could put them all on the screen at the same time. I could use this to emulate a Zoom class. I've used this in some of my earlier lectures when I've got my picture, my image small on the screen, but you're also seeing a PowerPoint presentation behind it, or you're seeing myself superimposed on top of the editing footage. These are the controls I'm doing, this transform section, mainly with zooming and positioning. Now let's go back. Let me delete this guy because we don't need him anymore. And I'm going to reset my modifications here. This spot here where I have 2 pieces of video, one on top of the other, now I can go back and talk about this first section here, this composite section. Opacity does what you think it does. It makes a clip transparent. So if I single click on this top thing and change my opacity, as I ramp that down, I'll start to see through it to Scott underneath. Not very practical in this moment, but it comes in handy in other places. This one though, this composite mode, this can be really fun. So if I drop that down and I hit the scroll bar, you will see there are a lot of choices here for how to combine these 2 images because one is on top of the other. Now normal means the top one is opaque and the bottom one is obscured. But as I start looking at some of these other ones, adds the 2 of them together. Okay, that doesn't really work for me. Darker color. Things that are dark get deleted, things that are light get left, or maybe it's the other way around. These can do some really interesting effects. That one is based on color.
First, we want to start by heating it up.
Most of the time you end up with something that looks weird when you're doing this particular thing. But let me jump down to the end of my timeline here. I'm going to grab a clip and, oh, why not? We'll use this same one that we just did, the serving milk. I'm going to drop it down here. But I'm going to drop it down here twice. I'm going to put the same video on layer 1 and layer 2. And just ignore the audio for the moment. It's not important for what we're doing. But now I've got identical footage on 2 adjacent layers, one above the other. Let me single click that so that it's open in the window. Watch what happens now when I start playing with this composite mode. All right, so if I hit additive, it got a lot brighter. It put the 2 pieces together. Hey. If I do one based on color, and I can turn this on and off to do a before and after, almost nothing happens with that one. How about if I do one based on, let's try hard mix. Look at that effect. That's kind of interesting. It's kind of comic booky. And I can combine that with the opacity. All right, so if I run the opacity completely down, I've got the original footage underneath it. But as I run it up, it starts combining these 2 clips in novel ways. And again, there are a lot of things in here. So this really becomes a try and see what happens, right? This makes it look a little more contrasty. Let me turn it off and on, off and on. So just looking at simple video transformation, there are a lot of options available to you here in the inspector window. Some of them don't come in handy very often. Some of them come in handy a lot. The cropping in particular I use along with the scaling and the positioning when I'm doing some form of picture-in-picture. And it also comes in very handy when I'm doing green screen work, which we'll get into at a later lesson. Okay, in the next video, we're going to stick with the inspector window, but I'm going to show you what it can do for your audio.